Okay, hello everybody. Welcome again to this episode of Top Voices, and this is a podcast run by International Achievers Group, where we have conversations with global thought leaders. And Bruno and I are very fortunate with the individuals that we get to speak to frequently. They give their time for free, they share their experience, their knowledge, and we believe it's very interesting, useful, helpful to other people, other organizations. So who are we? Obviously, we know Bruno. Bruno is Mr. Bruno Herrmann. He's a top voice that works with international organizations of all sizes, and he helps them to expand digitally and engage globally at scale. And Bruno is an all-round AI expert from a strategy, design, and execution perspective. And our guest today is Professor Kenneth Amaeshi. And Kenneth is a global expert in sustainable finance, strategy, and economic development with a deep understanding of Africa's unique challenges and opportunities. And in particular, Kenneth is also the economic advisor to the governor of Imo State in Nigeria. So I know we're going to have very, very interesting conversations about the different developments around the world. I'm Paula McGrath. I own and run International Achievers Group, and we work with organizations to expand, grow, right size internationally in terms of human capital and operational excellence. So we help people find good staff from all around the world. So let's get started. Kenneth, are you comfortable to start by telling us a little about yourself, your background, how you got into the world of work that you're in now?
Okay, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure. I started my career in 1998 in Nigeria. After graduating from the university, I studied philosophy and then had a master's in psychology. So based on that, I got into a consultancy firm that was very much focused on organizational development. So one of the products I sold then was the Franklin Covey 7 Habits for Highly Effective People.
Oh, yes.
So both the book and the training program. So I used to sit in, listen many, many times. And going through that, one resonated with my background in industrial organizational psychology, which was also built on organizational development. And it also resonated with my background in philosophy, especially the ethics part of it, because he was talking about moral leadership and how people can drive change at a personal level, at organizational level, at a societal level. So it was a huge influence on what I later went on to do. So I was doing the consulting business for 4 years. And during that period, I was also applying to study in the UK through the British Chevening Scholarship, because I was very much interested in studying abroad and broadening my horizon. So it was in 2002 that I got the scholarship to study in the UK through the Chevening Scholarship. And the first university I attended was the University of Hull in the northeast of England.
Okay.
And that's where I studied economics of public policy. But there's an interesting twist to that scholarship, because I applied for that scholarship about 7 times, and I got it at the 7th time, because you do it every year.
Yeah.
So I spent like 7 years applying. Initially, I wanted to study philosophy, and then I moved to psychology. But it was when I put in economics that I got it, because they were interested in helping people understand economics and economic development, and so I didn't have a first degree in economics or a master's in economics, but it was also a program that enabled me to pivot towards economics, because it provided the more like a conversion route to move for people who didn't study economics and their first degrees, and then they're able now to come into do a master's in economics. So that was very helpful, because it prepared me again to understand economics, especially the rudimentary side of it, right? So that's how whilst I was in Nigeria doing that consultancy job, it enabled me to create my personal mission statement. And in that mission statement, I said I wanted to be a professor, right?
Okay.
But I also wanted to teach in top universities in the world.
Yeah.
Remember at that time, I had no way, I didn't know how to get there. I didn't have the resources, but I just believed and hoped that we were able to do these things. And when things started falling in line, so when I did that master's in the UK, I knew I wanted to do a PhD. So the master's was just like a stepping stone, because if I wanted to be a professor or an academic, I needed more than a master's. And as I was doing that, I got another scholarship in the UK to do a master's in business administration at the University of Nottingham. I approached Nottingham and said, well, I wanted to do a PhD. They said, well, you came late. We just disbursed our scholarship. But there was an MBA program coming up, and it was funded by British American Tobacco. You won't believe that, right? It was on corporate social responsibility. And so corporate social responsibility ties back to my background in philosophy and my background in ethics. Through the work I was doing in Nigeria too, I learned the place of ethics in societal development. So I saw it again as a good combination of my background to where I want to get to. Because at that point, I already had the view that the Nigerian society needed to change.
Okay.
And in order to change, we need moral leaders, leaders who can understand their impacts on society. So, and again, I was also thinking about businesses. So how do we align the private sector businesses to societal agenda? And
I'm good. That's actually a huge topic of interest for us. It's just, can I just take you back a little bit, go back a little to your academic situation? You're obviously extremely determined and somebody with a lot of the, oh my goodness, not only focus, what's a better word than stickability, but somebody who can just stick at it until you get what you need. How did you find then, once you were doing the economics, do you feel that it was an essential need to do the course that you ended up doing? Do you understand the relevance of it?
Yes, the economics was a good preparation, if you ask me, for what I've become today.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't have that background in economics, probably some of the things I'm doing today might have taken a different turn. So the background in economics, I really wanted to do a PhD in economics since I came to do that master's. But again, I was following the scholarships, right, in a way, but in a strategic sense. So if I had my research, because the University of Hull offered me a PhD place then to continue in economics, but I pivoted to this MBA in corporate social responsibility. But one thing I took away from economics that has stayed with me, even in doing corporate social responsibility, is the understanding of corporate externalities. Externalities is a key problem in economics. So market failure, why does market fail? Because there are certain things we can't price. And if we can't price them, the market can't accept them. So you have that market failure. Say, for example, if you are a mother and you take care of your child, there's no market for it. I know some women complain and say, well, we are spending our time in terms of child upbringing or child caring, and there is no one pays us for that. But that's an essential level that society requires to grow, to reproduce itself. But there's no market for it, right? So that's a kind of a classic case of market failure. So that's what I then took into corporate social responsibility, because moving away from the idea that corporate social responsibility is about philanthropy, but then I refocus it on how to address corporate externalities. Corporates create negative impacts. They can also create positive impacts. Right? So understanding the fluctuation between positive impacts and negative impacts is what my background in economics helps me to bring into that space in terms of understanding corporate behavior.
And do you see an acceptance of that, a different style of acceptance, or even a difference in acceptance in Africa or Nigeria in particular, and in the UK and Europe? Or does a difference exist?
Is it in terms of the corporate social responsibility or business?
The corporate externalities and the acceptance of the market externalities, and I'm talking, and like the truth is that around the world we're all humans. We're all humans, and so many things contribute to our behaviours, and you understand much better than I do. You have much more higher levels of formal education around it. I suppose I'm thinking more about the cultural influences, because the cultural influences are huge.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're touching on a very important point. And then I'll tell you how I dealt with that. Because once I came into the space of corporate social responsibility, I started thinking about companies in Nigeria. And I was wondering, I mean, most of the corporate practices were learned from either from Europe or the US, right?
Okay.
So most businesses then were advising our top blue chip companies, so they tended to be global in approach, and and I started thinking about corporate social responsibility in the Nigerian context. I think I wrote one of the first papers on corporate social responsibility in Nigeria that was published in 2006. That's 20 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then CSI in Nigeria was seen as philanthropy. So companies doing things based on charity. And that thinking was informed, again, by the religious values of Nigerian organizations. Either people looking at it from Christianity, in terms of alms giving, or Islam also that talks about alms giving. So they saw it as a way of giving back to society. Although there was a time in Europe it had that coloration, but whilst I was studying corporate social responsibility in Europe, Europe has moved away beyond the idea of CSR as philanthropy, and it was going more into governance, market governance, economic governance. Whereas the Nigerian context then was still at that level of philanthropy. So which led me to focus most of my work on what you may call comparative CSR, comparative in the sense that I looked at the Nigerian context and said, how does it compare and contrast with the European model? So my PhD, following the Nottingham MBA, was at the University of Warwick. And there I compared UK corporate social responsibility reporting against the German corporate responsibility reporting, which gave me more insights. So although both of them are in Europe and they behave differently in terms of how they prioritize certain things, and I took that to the Nigerian context and now started making arguments to say that Nigerian businesses need to reflect the context and not just copy and paste things from abroad. Right? So, and that's where most of my work then have focused on Africa, and also rethinking business and society in the African context, so that Africans are not bound to use the rules and logics from the global north, so to speak. And one of the things I learned when I came to Europe again is that the world is socially constructed. It's whatever we make of it.
Yeah.
So it's not like, there is a God there with the 10 commandments. So these things didn't fall from the high heavens. So what we consider as good management practices, or even sometimes people say best practices, we are manufactured, we are constructed in different contexts. So it's for us in Africa to reflect and ask ourselves fundamental questions about how these things are working for us or not. And if they're not working for us, how do we change, right? So I give you an example with corporate governance. The corporate governance code or practice in the UK, for example, or even many in developed economies, talks about independent directors. The idea of the independent director is that you bring in on board somebody who comes in to represent the investors and who is also able to critique the management if
Yeah.
they are not doing the right thing, or even guide them, to create an alignment between the investors and management. Otherwise, because of the possibility that managers may go may do things that are at variance with what investors want.
Yeah.
So that's basically what the independent independent director is meant to do. But you come to the Nigerian context, right? The management now employs or engages independent directors, and these directors see it as a favor done to them.
Yeah.
So they lose their voice. They're just there to work, to pander to the whatever works for management.
Yeah.
So, but because they don't understand the essence of that independence, so they're just following a tick box exercise. The UK corporate governance or London Stock Exchange says we need to have independent directors. We appoint people from our circle, right? But if they understand that the essence of that independent director is to help checkmate and bring valuable contribution to the organization, probably they can come up with a different governance practice that may not say independent director, but just bring somebody on board who is able to challenge you, hold you to account, and make sure you do more like a critical friend, right?
Yeah.
And then the independent director wouldn't see it as a favor done to him or her. So that's just one example. And there are many examples, even in our politics, the kind of democracy we run, the parliamentary system, or we have the Senate. We started with the British parliamentary system. After a while, we jettisoned it and went to the American one, where we now have senators, and members of the House of Rep. But do we really need them? How do they fit into our sense of governance and democracy? I mean, these are borrowed practices. So there are things to be challenged, and that's where my work now is focused on, but looking at more of the economic side of things, the business side of things, to challenge some of the existing business practices, but also to encourage our people, Africans, to think inwards and be more pragmatic in the things they do. So one of the defining factors of my research at the moment is what we call Afri-capitalism. I don't know if you heard about it. Afri-capitalism is a word coined by a Nigerian entrepreneur and banker. His name is Tony Elumelu. And Tony's point is that the private sector in Africa can contribute to Africa's development. So that's the essence of Afri-capitalism. But then the question becomes, how can the private sector do that? In order for the private sector to do that, then they need to rethink their practices and rethink their ethos and purpose. And that way they can understand that they have a much bigger role to play in societal development than you will find elsewhere. Because in Europe, for example, we have this neat division of labor amongst the government, the private sector, and the civil society.
Yes, yeah.
So you assume that the government works well, you also assume that the civil society is there to pick up some of the things you may consider as government failure or market failure.
Yeah.
But that's how the society is here. But if you go to many African countries, the government may not be as strong as you want it to be, and the civil society is completely absent. So if you're a company then in that situation, and you want to use the rule books written in London and New York, then you miss the mark, because these are different contexts.
Yeah.
So that Afri-capitalism that talks about that Africanization, in a way, of business and management practices.
I have so many diversions I could go off here, actually around philosophy, to be honest with you, the philosophy of all this and international engagement and all that stuff. But Bruno, Bruno was traveling last week, and we had
the week before,
the week before, and we had our weekly meeting, Bruno and I, as we worked together, and you were filling me in on the business development and engagement in Africa. I found it completely fascinating. I don't know how much are you happy to, and then maybe you can join in and chat with Kenneth about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's not new, I think, because Asia has been investing in Africa for a long time. But as far as I've heard, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the investment from companies from Singapore or Hong Kong or Korea, these investments were made mostly in infrastructures. So roads, hospitals, schools, etc. But now it looks like since a few years, those investments have been more focused also on other topics or other areas of the economy, which is digital, which is very close to my heart, of course. But even beyond digital, food, the food industry. And there is a lot of potential for the food industry in Africa. So how do you see this sort of, investment trends coming from Asia, knowing that, of course, in Europe, we talk about it as well, because, I've seen so many posts on LinkedIn from people based in Africa saying it's time for Africa to invest in itself and not wait for Europeans to wait in itself. And of course, now in Europe, some people are wondering if European investors are going to be replaced by Asian investors, or if it's going to be just one more group of investors and Europeans will continue. But of course, the most important trend is that Africa believes in its future and of course can invest itself, take its future in its own hands, if you know what I mean. So how do you see that? And specifically, indeed, as Paula said, I heard that a lot in the past weeks, that some countries in Asia are definitely looking at African countries, not all countries, but certainly Nigeria is one of them, Rwanda, Ivory Coast, etc. So how do you see that, either from a positive side or from a less positive side?
Yeah, I think yesterday the European Commission had an event in Nigeria, in Lagos, and it was kind of Nigeria-Europe Business Forum.
Wow.
So it was only yesterday, yeah. And listening to the ambassador, I think the EU ambassador to West Africa, I think, or the head of mission, I don't know the specific title there, he was being interviewed and he made a point. He said that the investment from Europe into Africa is about 300 billion euros more, or 350, whereas the investment from China was like 50 billion euros. So that Europe was still significantly ahead. So maybe if you put it in the context of history of Europe and Africa over time, maybe China is just kind of a newcomer in the kind of African space. So which means that Europe is still very much into Africa, at least more than Asia at the moment. But the only thing I tell investors coming into Africa, that Africa sometimes is described as the last frontier and kind of the last market. But they should also understand that Africa shouldn't necessarily be understood solely as a market. Because what the market does is to extract and commercialize, and the market is very transactional, right? But if you see Africa as a continent made of people humans who have needs, of course, the market can be one way to address that, but it's much more than that. Then your business model should meet Africa where Africa is. Because sometimes people come with sophisticated things and they want to quick returns, overnight.
Yeah.
But you have to be patient. You have to meet Africa where Africa is. You have also to adapt your business model to support the development of the continent. So what Africa needs now is patient capital. What Africa needs now is Africa needs investors that will come in and not as fair weather friends. There was a time a lot of companies, not a lot, but some companies were leaving Africa and Nigeria in particular, and they wrote an article. And the point I was trying to make then is that it's in times of adversity that you know your true friends. So there are companies that come in and stay with you in thick and thin, and those ones you need to trust. But they're not there just to there are also foreign companies that come in to capture and undermine government, and that's how they operate. And there are also some that are just, we are there. If it's not going well, we exit.
Yeah.
Okay? But there are also some that come in genuinely and working very hard to be part of the solution they want to see. So some of these companies, that's my take on it. Anyone coming into Africa should genuinely be interested in Africa, right?
Yeah.
And that genuine interest then can guide what they do. But if you see Africa as a market, it's transactional, then maybe you can come in, make the quick money, and when it's not working, you exit. But that's not typically, I wouldn't say Africa doesn't need those kind of investors.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I put it. But
Yeah.
investors come in different shades and shapes. Right?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I heard, circling back on what you said now, what I heard as well is that there were, for some countries like China or Korea, these countries used to work and invest in Africa to actually produce something made in China or made in Korea. So they were investing in Africa in a very transactional mode. So as you said, it was just a market to extract from. But then there is a new trend now from China and Korea, and I can understand that second trend, which is no longer just made in China, it's also made by China, but in the market. So it's actually adapting the processes and the practices to local markets and being more embedded in local markets, rather than just say we are going to use those markets to produce our goods and or services and bring them back to Asia later on. And that's the difference. That I saw a very interesting presentation between the difference between made in China and made by China.
Yeah, but if you also think about what is happening in Africa now with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement,
Mm-hmm.
which in a way is saying that you need to produce in Africa because they call it something to do with origin, okay, where the thing originated from. So it creates an incentive for foreign companies now to come into Africa and manufacture in Africa. So you can now say made by China, but in Africa. Mm-hmm. But it's also, in that case, China trying to take advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, right? But whether it is made for China or made by China, the point I'm trying to make is that the benefits of that should be inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So it should benefit local people as much as it benefits foreigners. I've done this. I've been in the other area of my study is international business.
Yeah.
And one of the problems created by scholars in international business is this dichotomy between home and host countries. Mm-hmm. So that a Chinese company in Nigeria or in Kenya will see itself as a foreigner. So the home is China and the host is either Accra or Lagos. Okay. Yeah. Yes. But if you look at it from a scientific perspective or biological perspective, you can be it can be a symbiotic relationship when the host, is there, the host and the whatever that is inhabiting the host. But it can also be very exploitative, where the host dies as a result of that. Mm. So, but then if you're a company and say, wherever I am is my home, it changes the logic. It changes the business behavior. Because if you perpetually see yourself as a foreigner, the tendency will be to extract and run. Okay, what goes in and what goes out. Mm. And you complain about expatriation of your profit.
Yeah.
There was a report in 2016. It's called the Honest Report. And the report says the money that leaves Africa was more than what goes into Africa.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So that way, sometimes people say, oh, even if you take the AIDS and everything going into Africa, but what leaves Africa is much more than that. Meaning, again, Bruno going to a point about Africans investing in Africa. Mm-hmm. There's money in Africa. And even if you want to, again, I was saying businesses need to meet Africa where Africa is. Mm-hmm. If somebody needs a bicycle, there's no point by giving the person an aeroplane. It won't work. So because we start with this idea, oh, we need big businesses. Okay, they have a role to play. Oh, Africans should create multinationals. Fine. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the trend now, entrepreneurship in Africa, especially in the digital space, Bruno, you'll be aware of this. Mm-hmm. So they start with this whole idea of You want to create the next unicorn. Okay, because that's where the money is. But that's an individual who starts a business, grows the business, employs a few people, scales the business, employ more people, becomes a unicorn, makes loads of money, but unicorns don't employ many people.
Yeah.
Especially in the digital space. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, if you think about Africa, what are the two main issues that are not often talked about the African economy? The one is unemployment.
Yeah.
Unemployment in Africa is massive, it's high. The World Bank says about 60% of African young people are unemployed. And Africa is well over 1 billion people. Then the other thing that may not surprise you is that the African economy are about 70% informal. So most of these jobs are in the informal sector. So you find out that we are dealing with the top tip of the iceberg, the 30%. When policymakers or international governments talk about African economies or have conferences, it's the tiny 30%. And within that 30%, there is also a hierarchy there, right? And you find that we are talking about small number of people and small number of businesses that can create jobs. I give you an instance using Nigerian data.
Please, yeah.
There are about 30 banks in Nigeria.
30.
30.
Wow.
There are about 30 commercial banks. The largest among them in terms of employment is First Bank. First Bank employs about 20,000 people. So if we are generous enough to say each of the banks employed as much as First Bank, that means that the entire banking sector has the direct employment of 600,000, thereabout 600,000, which is not up to 1 million.
Yeah.
But the Nigerian population is over 200 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the same applies to telecoms. But one can say, oh, what about the indirect jobs? So even if you give it a multiplier effect of, say, 10 per job created by a bank, that's 6 million. If you say it's 100, it's 60 million. It's not even up to half.
Yeah.
So, but sometimes, some of these facts are not often at the surface. They're not top of the mind. We just see, business in Africa. We see flashy businesses, but they benefit a very few people. So that's why some of what we are doing in Imo State now is to go back to the grassroots and say, what can we do with grassroots? How can communities, villages create their own businesses? And these villages are good at creating social projects. So they can create or come together to fund the civic hall. They can come together and create rural electricity, or even do their roads or pipe-borne water. If they can invest in these social projects, why can't they create their own businesses? It can be a poultry farm that employs about 20 people, 30 people in the village. It gives them job. Okay, it can be a transport service, whatever it is. Instead of waiting for the government or waiting for these multinationals to give us jobs. I mean, even the study of economics in itself, from an European perspective, economics is the study of household economy. That's how we started economy. Right? It's the study of household economy. So the Europe we have today didn't just emerge with big companies, right?
No.
And then even if you're thinking about Europe and North America, the SMEs employ many people, or most people, than the big companies. So if the economy then needs to be seen as an ecology of firms, the big trees, the small trees, the shrubs, all coexisting, supporting it. So that's the thinking I'm currently championing in Imo State with the support of the governor, Senator Hope Uzodimma. He came up with this idea to say, how do you rethink unemployment in our countries and what solutions can be pursued in the interim? Because you look at it, it looks as a generational problem. And the generation is like 25 years. But as a governor, you have a maximum of 8 years. So what can you do? How can you solve a generational problem of 25 years in 8 years? So that's why the governor is thinking out of the box And also, I mean, Bruno, talking to your point again about digital, the government is training about 300,000 young people in digital skills. And if again you take a multiplier effect of 2 per person trained, that's another 600,000 plus the 300,000, that's 900,000. Okay, and unemployment in Imo State is high. About 1.5 million people don't have job in an economy that has a working population of about 3 million, 3.5 million. Right?
Okay.
So using the digital is one way to mop up the number of unemployment.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, but of course, you can say, but what will they do once you train them? They can start their own shops. They can stay in Nigeria and support businesses in Europe. That's where I'm looking at you now, Paula and Bruno. If you can support these entrepreneurs, help them with the connections.
Yeah.
They got English as a language. They, so English is a global business language these days.
The biggest challenge, Kenneth, for, I know Imo State, the governor is actually working hard at grassroots level. And I understand that most communities, and that's where I believe the strength of any country is the strength of its individual communities. And I experienced very high levels of standards of education with the people when I visited Imo State, a beautiful place in the world, phenomenally well-educated individuals, sharp as a tack. And it's a question that, for me, the question would be around how to let the world know that these people are there, keen to work, happy to work. There's lots of remote demand. And I do wonder if the knowledge is out there enough about the talent pool that's sitting, certainly what I saw and what I witnessed, and I'm obviously running a recruiting agency, so I know what employers ask for. So where do you see the challenge around that?
I think what you're doing now is important because they also need, we need a platform to orchestrate and showcase the talents in Africa. So it is good that we are having this conversation. It's also good to think about how these conversations can get to companies in Europe or businesses in the global north that may need to rethink whatever views they have, and also to see people there as people who are also not willing to just escape, because there's also this tendency, or they want to all migrate to Europe or to North America. If somebody is in Nigeria and is making $200 or $300 or $400 a month, that person is likely to be much more fulfilled than somebody, or than being in Europe and earning $400 or thereabouts, because you can't even pay your house rent with that one, right? So if you look at it in what they call purchasing power parity, so the person is better off earning that amount of money in Nigeria. So I think we need more like trust builders and trust bridges.
Yeah.
So that's what we need. So either the government is investing in that, or friends of Africa, friends of Nigeria are helping us create that, because it's very important.
And as sort of a small business, I have a small business myself, but other business owners around the world might be a little nervous of going into Nigeria. So what's your, because of the international reputation that it has, and it has a reputation for both brilliance and challenging. So if I was an individual, a company owner that was looking to extend into your part of the world, which is seen as one of the fastest growing parts of the world from a business perspective, how do I find out more information about, can it work? How can it work? What is this real situation for company owners?
Yes, I think that's what, again, coming back to this idea of having, say, organizations like yours becoming that bridge. I've been even in academia, there was a time I was trying to do an executive education program on business and government relations, more like EU-Africa business relations, right? So that way you can bring some African businesses or entrepreneurs, put them in touch with the Europeans. So that way is because, once they meet themselves and know they can speak the same language or they can support each other, it makes life a lot easier. So I think we need spaces where these conversations can be had, where people can interact. But sometimes also, I mean, you can have it in Africa, but then the question becomes, the people from Europe are saying, what is in Africa? And then if the Africans want to come over to Europe to do it, they may find, some hurdles like visa restrictions. So maybe having more of online programs or platforms that can bridge that gap will necessarily help. And once they start interacting, then the value can then show for itself. But having something, or even having organizations that are specialized in identifying these talents and matching them with companies, the same way you have dating sites, more like what dating site for African talents and the businesses that need them out here. So that would be helpful. And maybe both Africans also can invest, those who have the latitude and experience, and also create such organizations. But then imagine you now having this organization in Ireland, then you have a counterpart in Nigeria that will also be helping you source. So both of you would now act as intermediaries to now serve common clients. Maybe that could be one.
You've actually just given me an idea. Speak to you separately, but it's more from a philosophical slant, but also there could be commercial benefit for people who are looking for high quality talent. Bruno, I'm going to ask you to, but I will come back to you on that because I think it might be workable. I honestly hadn't thought of it until you started.
Yeah, no, I agree, Paul. I think this is probably what you said, Kenneth, about not just connecting people, but having a platform. I think the word platform is really important because connections, I mean, there are already many connections, Kenneth, you mentioned them, EU, Africa, etc. These are connections, like lines, straight lines, one, A, B, C, etc. But a platform is a different thing for me. A platform is common ground where people are not just connected, but they are also delivering something together, if you know what I mean. So, of course, it's based on connections, but I think, Paula, I think they should be a way. And I'm going to preach for my church, but digital has a great role to play in that. Even more today, I would say that we're all in full artificial intelligence deployment. There are obviously more opportunities for Africa and other regions, Europe, of course, but Asia was telling me the same, that of course, there are ways to put things in common when it comes to artificial intelligence, because it's not just about, UI or development, it's about data, it's about infrastructure, it's about energy. Energy is very important. And I think there are a couple of projects now in Algeria to create big farms of solar energy, because there is a huge demand in Europe for electricity. And of course, Europe is already overcrowded. So they try to find other countries where they can install huge farms of solar panels, and this is not just a few panels, it's just thousands of panels. So I think, there are a number of ways, but of course, as I said, I'm preaching for my church about digital, but beyond digital, there are, other industries. I mentioned energy. I think there are other industries, education, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you're right, Paula. They certainly, the concept of platform is definitely has to be exploited in some way, because it's really it's much better. I mean, I shouldn't say better, but it's going to be much more valuable than only connections. Connections are necessary. Platforms are crucial.
I also think that what I have noticed happening, I've been in business about 300 years. It definitely feels like that some days. But I have noticed a difference in the last 15 or 20 years in, and I know social media is wonderful and social media is hard work. I mean, an awful lot of connections are only shallow, very, very shallow. And because if there's not an immediate advantage, being perceived, mostly financial, economic, transactional, it stays very shallow because the way the business culture, my experience of it, has evolved. So there are so many terms that we use nowadays, like what's that word where people ghosting and stuff like that, ridiculous carry on. Absolutely. And that for me, I'm just sort of agreeing with what Bruno was saying. You know, light touch connections are lovely, but they're not always that actionable or valuable. It's how to make things happen.
Yeah, and I would say, for what I know, that's just based on my own experience and knowledge, this is probably even more important for Africa, because in the African culture, direct contact is very important. So, you know, and collaboration, it's transactional modes, I think, based in what I know, again, not about Nigeria, but I've heard some other things about Rwanda and Congo, that you need to really establish not just connections, but you need to really be engaging with people because it's part of the culture.
Workable relations.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us a little about how advanced or which parts of the commercial world that AI is in Nigeria, Imo State. Like, is there a huge, I mean, you mentioned there about all these young people that are being trained on it. To what level are they being trained?
I don't know the level. I mean, we have a commissioner who is in charge of that, and I'm not a kind of IT literate myself. I mean, overly sophisticated. Well, before I go into that, I'll come back to it. But the point that Bruno made about platform, I think it's very important. As much as people appreciate face-to-face conversations, but you know, people can also meet virtually. So if you're able to create that platform, be helpful in the interim at least. But then the platform is also to be intra-Africa. So Nigeria, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana, Zimbabwe. So Africans also connected, because sometimes we see this, it's like Africa, Europe, Africa, US. But I think there is also much more that can happen within Africa, Africans for Africa, right?
It's a good point.
It may be something to also consider. So in terms of the AI, I learned there is a robotic center now being built, and the robotic can do operation surgery, right?
Wow.
So it's at that level. And I also see people using AI for some kind of creative work, right? It might also apply to, because some people that make money from social media through clicks and all sorts. Some organizations are also bringing it into data analysis, information management, and stuff like that. So, but it's not, I don't think it's replacing much jobs or many jobs as probably is happening elsewhere, because there are no jobs anyway. So
I understand. Nollywood is a huge industry. I don't know whether AI will have an impact on that.
I think it might have, because also you have people now who are independent producers, and they can stay in their rooms and do things. I know somebody also who has invested in, is it cartoon using AI and so, you know. So I think Nollywood is likely to be affected by it, but to what extent and how, I don't know. But the beauty of Nollywood also is that people, they tend to, say for example, if you want to film rural areas, I don't think AI can do that for you. So you still need the real people, because the uniqueness of the Nollywood is kind of the local context tries to, you know. But if you're going into, say, fictions and all those kind of scientific movies, maybe that's where. But if you still want to capture people in their natural state, I don't think AI can do that.
Okay. Bruno, is there any other questions that?
No, maybe just one, very high level one, probably. Kenneth, of course, there are a number of industries growing in Africa, in Nigeria, in Africa in general. For you, what is the number one industry that is growing now? I mean, the industry that is growing fastest in Africa, and where is digital in that ranking? Is it number 2, number 1, maybe number 10? How do you rank digital in terms of growth industry, if I can put it like that?
You see, I mean, if we use growth the way we'll see it in Europe, okay, you may come with a different scenario. But if I say growth here is about creating jobs, the sector that is more inclusive, more empowering, it might not be the typical ones you want to see, right? Because this is a different way of thinking about Africa and what growth can mean. Agriculture still remains the largest way of creating jobs. And if AI can support that in any way or any form of technology, that would be massive. So because you can say it's telecoms today, but telecoms may not be creating the number of jobs we want. You may say it is kind of, because digital companies all over the world are the most highly rated now. If you're looking at, Elon Musk, for example, what he's done with it. And then it's gone beyond the traditional oil and gas companies that used to occupy very high positions or even manufacture it. So I would say let's rethink growth, corporate growth or sector growth, industrial growth in Africa from the perspective of how many jobs can the sectors create. So if I put it that way, then agriculture is still number 1.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if I can just finish on that note, Kenneth, you mentioned something which is absolutely a great point, the role of Elon Musk in the digital industry. Several months ago, I read a very interesting article about digital enablement in Africa. And one of the top companies enabling digital in Africa is Starlink. And it's a US company because it's Elon Musk behind Starlink. So that's an example where potentially Africa could also have their own internet access company without depending on Starlink. Starlink is great because you can access internet wherever you are, in the middle of the desert or anywhere on this planet. But of course, Starlink is and remains a US company. But the other point, another way to look at it is instead of competing, because when you think about trade is also allowing or the comparative advantage. So if the US now has comparative advantage in giving us satellites, there's no point competing. But we can also think of how can that satellite help us to produce more food we can sell to the US. Right? Exactly.
So it's about technology helping us to do the things we do better than others.
Is there any question, Kenneth, that we haven't asked you that you'd like to cover?
I think we covered almost everything in a way, because I've talked about the project we are doing in Imo State, the One Kindred, One Business initiative. I didn't mention it, but it's linked to the Africapitalism. And it's an initiative of the governor because I talked about the digital project. So creating 300,000 jobs. But the governor also knows that not every person will be interested in digital.
No, I understand that.
So now he has encouraged communities to create their own businesses, and we call it One Kindred, One Business initiative, which is OKOBI, OKOBI. The good thing is that acronym has also an Igbo meaning, which people can relate to, depending on how you stretch it. OKOBI means a great palace, so which can also translate to a great society, a great city.
Communities,
It can also mean Okobi, which means somebody with a generous heart, or somebody who is courageous, right? So it has an Igbo connotation, meaning people can relate to. But again, we don't want that to be limited by its context, socio-cultural context. So it's about one kindred, one business. A kindred here is not people you have family relationship with. It's people you share common interests with. So we are promoting group-based entrepreneurship, moving away from the individual-based approach to say, let's work as a group. And there is an African saying that if you want to travel fast, travel alone. But if you want to travel far, travel with others. And that's part of the Okobi philosophy. And the good news is that in the last 2 months, the federal government of Nigeria has adopted this project. And now is in a position to roll it out across the country. to encourage other states to use the Okobi model as one way to address youth unemployment.
Okay.
So it's part of what they call the Human Capital Development 2.0, which is under the presidency.
Yeah. So I'm just making a note of this.
Yeah.
And
also to mention that in the last 2 years, this thing started, it has created about 600 community and group-owned businesses.
Okay.
And between them, they have over 20,000 members or associates. We don't say employees because some of them are co-owners as well, right?
Yeah.
And again, to put it in context, the government of Imo State employs about 50,000 people. That's teachers and civil servants. But this movement, within 2 years, has empowered over 20,000. So if you have another 2 years, it will empower more people than the state government employs.
Yeah.
And that's the trick there, that when people do things for themselves, they take ownership.
Yeah.
And they direct their future and their own economic empowerment.
Yeah. You know that saying, did I have this conversation with you last time? How do you eat an elephant?
Yes.
Yeah. One bite at a time.
Yes.
Because I think if we're sitting around waiting to solve the huge big problem, you end up doing nothing.
Exactly. Be overwhelmed, actually.
You're overwhelmed completely. There's no change. Okay. I want to say a big thank you to Professor Kenneth Amaeshi. I have found it hugely interesting. Now, I obviously have a fairly strong personal interest in the part of the world from which you come, but even still, I know that the audience is always interested in global discussions, global opportunities, from both, business coming out of Nigeria and possibly business going into Nigeria. And I think you've been very generous with your honesty about the challenges and the opportunities, like pretty much every part of the world. So again, thank you. And thank you, Bruno. And thank you, audience, for watching and listening.